Okay, happy post-Thanksgiving turn of the month and almost New Year kind of day. I am sitting here in my dad's study after having consumed way too much turkey, and getting a chance to talk to somebody who I'm really excited to talk to. His name is Brian Funk. He goes by the name of AfroDJMac, and I think if you are in the Ableton world, you absolutely know who this is. If you're not, you're probably going to want to go and do a little digging, because he has done an amazing sets of tutorials and of content. I got to know him a little more directly through my friend Mark Mosher, who introduced us and strongly suggested that Brian be a part of the interviews. And the more I dug, the more excited I was to do it. So with that, I introduce you to Brian Funk. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hi, how you doing, Darren?
I'm doing great. How did you do for Thanksgiving?
I did very well. Kept it at home. My girlfriend, Courtney, created a masterpiece of a dinner, which, I, of course, gorged myself on. And everyone was happy. Everyone was thrilled. It was a great experience,
That's cool. Did you? I'm surprised it's Black Friday and you aren't running around shopping like a maniac.
You know what? That's like exactly the opposite of what I want to be doing. The stores, to begin with, I kind of get overwhelmed with.
Yeah.
Black Friday is like that feeling times 100. So
it's the antithesis of how you want to live your life. Right?
Oh yeah, I've like Amazon Prime. I'd much rather sit in my house and just let it come to me.
Right, I hear you. So you mentioned in our pre-interview that you actually listen to the podcast. I'm quite honored for that to be the case. But that means you probably know how this starts off, which is my first question, as always, is for you to tell me a little bit about your background and kind of the things that have made you the artist that you are, but also let us know what it is that is, represents your current work and the kind of things that you're most proud of as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I love the podcast. So this is an exciting experience for me as well. So I started playing guitar when I was about 14 years old. My friend Mike showed me how to play Enter Sandman on the guitar. And to be honest, at that point in my life, it never occurred to me that if I got a guitar, I could learn those songs that I heard on the radio. I don't know if like rock stars were just like so much larger than life to me that it just seemed something that was out of my, realm of possibilities. But it blew my mind, and I was hooked ever since. And, we played music together all the time. And we were in bands, rock bands, throughout high school. And that's where I really spent most of my time, was rock music, indie rock, Beatles, Nirvana was the stuff I learned on. And I guess what really got me into where I am now is I loved recording. I got my first 4-track tape recorder, this little Tascam Porta Studios.
Right.
Loved putting sound together. And all along, kind of craving for like the capabilities of a professional studio. We had ADAT machines for a little while. We got off of eBay, and playing in bands all along. And I think it was really like listening to the Beatles and how they would take, unusual sounds and turn them into musical instruments and melodic components to their music that got me into experimenting with electronic music. So once, I sold, regrettably, I sold a 24-channel Tascam mixer to get my first laptop. And that's when I started with Pro Tools, moved through Logic, and went up with Ableton Live. What really got me with Ableton Live was the ease of creating my own sounds and instruments. And I just went to town sampling everything I could think of, pots and pans, and, all the way up to just like lawnmowers and whatever made noise. And that's just endlessly fascinating to me.
Right. Now, when I look at your site, and for those of you who are listening, that's AfroDJMac.com, will sort of like introduce you to the work that Brian's been doing. it seems like you're really focused on instrument building, and that kind of aligns with what you just said. What is it about creating an instrument in Ableton that's more, I don't know, that you find more interesting than doing it in like Contact or something like that?
I think it's a very like easy experience for me. I had a little bit of time I spent doing it with Logic.
Right.
And it was a lot of fun, but it felt very like mathematical and computery. I'm plugging in numbers for the loops start and the loops end, you know. And I just found doing it in live was really quick, simple, and I got results much faster. That's really all it was, I suppose, was just the getting to the results faster.
Sure. Now, you've also, in looking over the list of the things that you've worked on, there's a lot of retro machinery that you play with, and particularly stuff that wouldn't prototypically be called great sounding.
Yeah.
You know, so you do a lot of things like with old Casio type devices, and I don't know. You have one that's called the Super 8-bit Live Pack, which I think is, I just love those kind of sounds, and I think it's really cool that you latched into them. What is it about sort of the low-tech, low-fidelity stuff that interests you?
Well, probably a lot of things. I think one of the biggest ones is nostalgia. I grew up playing more video games than I will probably ever admit to, you know, red eyes and sore thumbs.
Right.
But, my parents would probably roll their eyes at me for that. But they were always trying to get me outside. And not that I didn't hang out outside, but, video games were huge growing up. So there's a lot of nostalgia to those sounds. That's definitely what got the video game stuff going. And as far as like the cheap keyboards, the Casio and stuff, I've always kind of found like, I guess there's always a place for everything.
Right.
And, if you have everything recorded pristinely, I guess this goes back to when we first started getting our real studio equipment, me and a couple friends. We'd get a nice microphone, we'd be able to record things really nice. And you start layering all these nice recordings together. And then maybe we would grab like a cheap Radio Shack microphone and record something else. And it just gave it its place in the mix.
Yeah.
It's funny how, it's not so much that there's good and bad sounds, it's like appropriate sounds. And I found like sometimes I have this $100 Casio or Yamaha keyboard that you get, from like Costco or something that I got when I was probably about 15 years old. And some of the drum sounds are just so cool. They just have like a vibe and a life to them. And for me, starting out with like the tape machines, the 4-track cassette recorders, always longed for the clean professional studio sound. And now that I have it, I kind of miss some of the magic that would happen on my 4-track tape recorder.
Yeah, I know. I want to actually explore that a little more because I run into the same thing. I started off with a Tascam Porta Studio as well, and also at the same time, I was really influenced by a lot of stuff that was, I would say it was like classic rock of one ilk or another, So it was recorded at the highest end of equipment, and I mentioned this in an earlier podcast too. I feel like somehow I missed the memo that said tape op style, like weird, grungy sound was cool. I just felt like somehow that ugly sound was my fault for doing something wrong,
Yeah.
And so I spent so much time looking for that, and it's only later, much later, that I came to realize that some of that funky stuff, what's actually there is the machines that have some soul, right?
Yes, exactly. So,
and, trying to find the soulfulness in some of this gear could be, I noticed one of the sound packs you have is Casio VL1, which I actually did a bunch of recording of. And finding the soulfulness of it means rejecting like 90% of the sounds it actually makes.
Yeah.
And then, finding the 10% that actually really sound cool. And it's always like on the ragged edges, like the flute played way too low.
Yeah.
Or the bass guitar played way too high. That was when things started getting interesting.
They start falling apart, those sounds. And
yeah. But it was...
weird things happen.
It took me a long time to get to the point where I realized, wow, that kind of... the fact that I worked that hard to find the right tone out of that machine meant that there was a soulfulness to it that didn't exist when I would take the really great synth and play it into the really great recorder.
I think part of that for me was maybe submission,
Yeah.
Trying to get things perfect and realizing it wasn't working out. So I'm just going to sort of accept what I can do and stop worrying about getting things sounding perfect. And that kind of, today, this day and age, like it's very easy to get those clean recordings. And it's also very easy to get obsessive about it too. Yeah. And making everything perfect. And once I kind of let go of that, I found I was making music easier and embracing the kind of defects and if somebody was talking in the background of a track I was recording, to me that kind of became cool after a while.
Right.
You always heard that on the Beatles records and some of the old recordings, some kind of nonsense going on, and that made people listen and they'd say, "What is he saying? Paul is dead. What's going on?" Creates the mystique. Sounds like real people doing it.
Yeah, I hear you, and it's funny because for me, in the early days of recording, my biggest influence was Steely Dan. What a horrible influence to have, right? I really wish it would have been like Iggy Pop or someone,
Yeah,
whose goal was to do a whole bunch of stuff and do it quick and get it onto wax and get it out there. Instead, my influence was these people who were anal retentive to the hilt, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, it seemed that stuck in my head as somehow representing being serious,
Yeah, I've always appreciated Neil Young, for instance, for his attitude is kind of get it while it's hot,
Right.
fresh, and I've worked with friends before. One of my friends, Dave, was really, I'm getting deeper and deeper into computer recording, and he's getting into his Boss BR8 digital 8-track. And I'm thinking, this is like a toy almost you're using.
Right.
Yet he's pumping out recordings, and they sound cool. They've got this dirtiness to them, and he's really got the energy of his tracks going. And sometimes you lose that when you get too clinical, and you really you're building things, and you're trying to make everything sound just right, and you start to lose that kind of passion you had that made you want to go record in the first place.
Sure. So when you're kind of contemplating the idea of putting together a sample pack or something like that, what is it? How much do you pre-think it versus how much do you go with something that inspires you? So, for example, you've got one that's you call the Poly 800 Armageddon pack, right? So that's obviously a Poly 800, and you're doing a bunch of manipulation on it. My question is, were you playing the Poly 800 and said, "Oh, I got to do a pack," or did you say, "I want to do a pack," and the Poly 800 is a lot of fun,
Yeah.
Which way do you kind of go with that?
That particular one, my buddy Mike Long, the same guy that showed me how to play Enter Sandman, got the Poly 800 off of Craigslist or something like that. And he was just playing around with it and loved it, and as we started listening to it more and more, we sort of got a kick out of the kind of end of the world sound to it. Right. And this is in 2012, December 21st is coming up. And it's ripe for the time. And, it had this sci-fi 80s Terminator sound to it that, again, there's a nostalgia to that. We grew up watching those movies. We just started making sounds that kind of embodied that feeling. So I think the real thing that happens is it's born out of what do I want?
Sure.
I want to have these really cool Terminator sounds, for synthesizers to use, and I want to have Nintendo sounds. That's the real thing. My outlook, if I'm going to build a big pack, I at least want to know that I'm going to end up with something that I'm happy to use. So it's kind of like I'm building myself the thing, and then if other people want it, that's great.
Well, it's interesting because when I look at like your stuff, it looks like a very personal collection that is sort of being shown to me. It's sort of like I was just at a store with my son, and it was one of these stores that sells like Magic the Gathering cards and stuff like that. Right? And you talk to people, and they would kind of like open up their little wallet and show you their special collection of stuff that represents their favorite thing. Right? I look at your list of things, and I feel that sense of it being a very personal collection and sort of a thing that is kind of your stuff that you're also letting other people take a look at, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's, I'm not going to really get too... I just wouldn't have the patience to start building something that I'm not personally interested in.
Right.
Then it becomes work. It becomes a job. And I think like kind of one thing I'm always trying to do is put some heart and soul into it and put something, that extra sprinkle of love that makes the mashed potatoes that grandma makes so delicious in there. I'm looking for that. So yeah, I think that's very true. It's just like if it catches my ear kind of thing, that I'm interested in it.
Sure. Now you said that you started off and kind of came through the system as a rock musician, and you kind of swung over to electronic musician as a result of liking to do sound design. What would you say is the kind of music you're doing now?
Well, right now I'm still, I think, rooted in like the rock and roll songwriter kind of thing. I have lyrics in most of my songs. I'm singing their verses and choruses. I'm always into like the catchy, fun song. That's just something I've always enjoyed. That's what really gets me, I think, is the song. The song is number one. A lot of times the sounds inspire me to create the songs, but the song is really key. So right now I think I'm making like it's kind of rockish. It's kind of electronic elements are in there. Some of the big, heavier beats, even production techniques, maybe like sidechain compression or something that's really common in electronic music.
Right.
But it's kind of like a spattering of the things I'm into. There's video game sounds, there's guitar, there's samples from video games and movies and stuff like that. I have a hard time describing it, to be honest with you, but I think it's like kind of important for me to say like it's very song centric though.
Well, I think that's interesting because a lot of the people doing electronic based music, and particularly a lot of people using Ableton, avoid song form and particularly avoid lyrics as if they were radioactive. And I think some of it comes from the bedroom producer thing, which, is people saying, I'm not actually even comfortable talking to people, let alone singing them a song, so I'm just going to stick with the instrumental, right?
Yeah, I do see that a lot. A lot of the music that I come across is instrumental, and it's got me more into instrumental music, actually, as a result. But yeah, for me, it's always the song, that's what catches me. That's what gets me excited, singing along to like a song I love.
Well, and don't you think that having lyrics actually can make a song a lot more memorable? I mean, I have to admit that even though I had some, and even going back to my rock and roll days, I loved Edgar Winter's Frankenstein, and I could sing it. I just didn't walk around singing it, it versus singing, Mustang Sally, right?
Yeah.
It's there's something about the lyrics that make a song somehow stick in our brains better.
Yeah, well, you get that whole idea behind it, the whole theme that goes on, the message. It's, in an instrumental track, it's more, I think, about the vibe and the feeling.
Right.
But I guess one of the last bands I was in, it's kind of a revelation we had was like, we're going to be playing in bars all the time. We're going to be playing for people that are out trying to have fun. So why are we going to give them material that is like, deep and arty and,
why be so serious, right?
Right. So we just had fun with it. We were like a surf rock band, kind of like the Ramones and the Beach Boys meet Nirvana or something like that. And all our songs were 2.5 minutes long, but they all had catchy choruses and they were all like saying something like enjoyable and like kind of in the mood for what you were doing if you were out at a bar on a Friday night.
Right.
And that just like, stirs up an energy I just don't think you get if you can sing along with something and there's some kind of like idea that you're promoting, whatever it might be. We had a song called Me and the Guys. It was just about going out and hanging out with the guys, but it was fun. It was, and that was the whole point of it, was to be fun first. And I think the lyrics really help you drive some of those ideas home.
Drive them home, right, yeah. It seems like it's hard to do instrumental music that's kind of simple. Mm-hmm. That by the nature of the focus that you give the instrumentation in instrumental music, all of a sudden it's like, well, I have to layer this 17 times and all this stuff. Where if you're doing vocals, you can have a VL1 doing a counter melody and everyone's like, well, that was quirky and cool.
Right.
Especially if the lyrics kind of back up that conceptually.
Yeah, and you can look at like just some of the chord progressions. You're never going to hear an electronic instrumental, intelligent dance music track that's doing like the 1-4-5 progression. Right. But you can hear millions of great rock songs that rely on it.
Right.
And it's just whatever it is, there's a magic to that progression. But you don't hear that. And often, like, you don't even hear chord progressions in a lot of instrumental music.
Well, because a lot of instrumental music is so focused on the sound. I mean, I have to admit that when techno music came along, I was really excited by music that was willing to say, we're going to move sound design front and center. Mm-hmm. I was really excited by that, right? But, and boy, this is going to show me as the whole, kids get off my lawn kind of a guy. But
we've all got that in us.
I guess we do. But sort of I teach at a local university, and I just got done teaching a sound arts class. And what I noticed was that all the kids wanted to use these dubstep tracks. And dubstep tracks is really the victory of sound design over any subtlety whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
And I actually found myself sort of like, oh man, someone would just give me like 4 bars of a string section, right?
Yeah.
Or something that didn't have a big bass drop as the important, as the comma in the middle of the sentence, right?
Right.
I started really craving more traditional song form and more traditional instrumentation simply because I felt like I was getting pummeled with these sounds. Now, again, you can just visualize me shaking my tiny fist at the world and saying, you have forgotten me, right? But there is, I had always thought that the thing I longed for was more sound design. And then when I get completely surrounded by it, it's sort of like, I kind of miss that song form stuff as well.
There are certainly trends in music that are always going to kind of turn you off. You know? I don't necessarily see it as a one or the other kind of thing. I don't listen to dubstep. It's not for me, really. But I do appreciate a lot of the techniques that are used. I've learned a lot from it. I've learned a lot about the way they chop things up and just some of the constantly changing like big synth parts, and how to make your bass drop really heavy and have an impact. That's a dynamics thing in there, which I think is kind of cool. So I look at a lot of that stuff as something to learn from. I'm not going to necessarily put it on and like, sound like I've got like a circular saw running in my background.
You're not gonna like wash dishes and fold clothes to that, right?
Yeah. And I guess probably most of those people aren't either. They're probably, that's music for a certain environment, and where they listen, it's very effective there. But as far as, me, like you said, if I'm going to put on my headphones and just kind of take a walk or something with my dog, I'm not going to want that going on.
Right. So I don't get many people that, I haven't interviewed many people that have kind of this lyrics part to their thing. So I want to dive into this a little more and pick your brain about the process you go through to do that. What is it? First of all, what is it that makes you that comfortable with words? I mean, if I had to start, it doesn't help that I have a tremendous self-consciousness about my voice, right? I come from northern Wisconsin. I feel like I just fell off the turnip truck, so I have self-consciousness about my voice, which means that I tend to be really self-conscious about the words I use. And all of a sudden, the whole concept of making lyrics is this black hole of self-reflection and depression that drives me nuts. How do you avoid all that stuff, or don't you? I don't know.
Well, Darwin, to tell you first off, I think you've got a great voice for the show. Just,
I wasn't actually fishing for a compliment, but I'll take it.
No, but it's true. Even when we started this conversation, it has a weight to it, which is really nice. But I understand that completely. I'm from New York, and sometimes you start to sound, Long Island guy here. Sometimes I hear myself and I notice that a lot.
Right.
I think for me, probably I was just too young and naive when I started.
Oh, sure. Okay.
I didn't even know I was singing bad until like I started to really listen back. But I think a lot of it is done at home in the bedroom, in the basement studio, so there's no one there listening. There's no one there critiquing you. So you have your chance to work on it. And, every once in a while you get something you like, and that's what you put out. So there's a filtering process going on. But
hold on a second,
though.
Before you go farther with that, I want to hear more about that, because the only person who I've ever heard talk about that editing process was Brian Eno, who talks about making massive amounts of work for the little amount that he releases, right?
Yeah.
Tell me, since you opened the door, tell me what is what that editing process looks like. Do you record it and just say, oh, I hate that recording, and put it away and never look at it again? Do you delete the recording? Do you stash it somewhere and come back later and say, that was brilliant? And that's how you decide. What is the mechanism that you go through in determining when you've got a keeper?
Well, every once in a while you have that magic day where you just find it and you found it and it just unfolds before you. But that is like, 1 in a million, unfortunately. There's a lot of working at it. I'm always experimenting just with making things up. Even if, if I'm learning, if I'm trying to come up with new techniques, or if I'm building, say, a sound pack, I try to make something with it. And every once in a while you get something you like that's really nice. It depends a lot about like if I'm in the mood for it, I think. But I try not to delete anything. I try to just keep stuff, which, is a problem in of itself, because you get, what do you sift through once you have those gigs of information and all? There's a lot of the kind of coming back to it and being like, that was pretty good. Because sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, you think something completely sucks because like you don't like the way your vocal is EQ'd,
right?
Or you
or
feel
just
like
the headphone feedback or whatever. It didn't work.
Something like, there's so many things that can kill your motivation and inspiration in a flash. And I think looking back after some time passes, you sometimes do get surprised and say, that's actually pretty good. I might work with that, or or that's perfect the way it is. I don't know what my problem was.
Right.
But it's sometimes that stuff doesn't strike me until later on, a little while later. And sometimes you know right away and you're just feeling it and you're in the mood for it and it just happens. But that is really probably very, few and far between.
Right. Okay, so I'm sorry for hijacking the conversation, but
No.
You brought it up, and I've been dying to find someone who I could make talk about that process. So, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
But
Anyway. There's no magic formula, though. For me, it's just keep working, keep going. One of my favorite books I've read is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which is just so great for getting you motivated. And he talks about being a pro, and the pro doesn't wait around for the inspiration or the mood is right. The pro just gets to work every single day and then looks at it later. The point of the job is not to make something amazing. It's just to make something. And in that process, something amazing will hopefully come out. Sure.
Now, what for you when you're developing new material, how do you germinate the seeds of ideas? So, for example, one of the tricks that I found really works for me is to say, well, I'm going to make basically a cover version of some track, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll be like an hour into it, and I'll be like, well, that bass line was wrong, but I really like that bass line. Yeah. I don't need to do that track anymore. I'm just going to do my own thing based off of this thing I stumbled on. There was something about, limiting myself to saying I'm going to do a cover of this simple thing that gave me almost like a sense of relief that I could just get started.
Yeah. I like that process a lot, actually. I grew up, thinking like you're ripping that off, you're copying this. And my first band was very big into early Weezer. That was very defining material for us.
Okay.
And we sounded like it a bit, but we didn't sound exactly like them. And looking back, I don't even know how many people would draw that connection anymore.
Right.
But I think having like something you're kind of aiming at, whether or not you hit the target, and sometimes it's better to not hit the target.
Yeah.
It does like focus your efforts, because if you think about it, when you go to sit down and make music, you have the world at your fingertips nowadays. You've got pretty much access to every sound ever. Sample packs get you any synth you could ever want to use. If you play some instruments, you've got that. There's so much to choose from, and that in itself is overwhelming sometimes. Back in the day, the 4-track recorder, I had a guitar.
Right.
That was it. It was going to happen on guitar, and that eliminated that decision to like, what am I going to make this track sound like? And you just went for it from there. And I think I got a lot more done with that. So I like that idea of like I'll hear a song, like, oh, I like what they're doing there. I'm going to try something like that. And, back in the old days, I might have thought that was copying, but now I realize it's just kind of being inspired.
Well, there's a filtering thing that happens there too. Most of us have neither the chops nor the memory to be able to say, everything I heard today is still in the hopper and I'm going to regurgitate that.
Yeah.
Just the process of it going into your head, your preference machine, keeping some things and throwing away other things, makes it so that it's going to be impossible for you to actually be stealing anyway. Yeah,
it's kind of true. And it's a funny thing. When I realized it, I felt very relieved.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, great. Like now I can kind of learn from anything. I can steal even a chord progression if I wanted to.
Right.
I think I read Kurt Cobain saying he used to rewrite Beatles songs until they were his own songs, changing this, changing that.
Oh, that's great.
It was a technique he used.
Sure.
I don't know if that's hearsay, so I don't want to go on air putting words in someone's mouth. But
whether it's true or not, it's a great concept.
Yeah, the concept I thought was kind of cool, and it sort of freed me from things like, oh, that's a cool drum beat, let's use that and let's build from there. So I like that process a lot. I'm a big believer in like creating limitations personally, especially nowadays, where, like I said, there's just too many options. I can, you could spend all day going through your 9,000 kick drum samples till you find the perfect one. Right. And then you have no music to show for it.
Yeah. So what are some things that you do to limit your palette, or put limits on yourself?
Well, like part of my creating my own sounds is I decide to use them, and now I'm kind of limited. They're getting kind of large now, but there's a limitation there. I might decide today I want to play my guitar. Today I'm going to sit down at the drums maybe, or sometimes it's just a theme that pops in your head, like something somebody will say, and you're like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to see if I can't make a song out of that. But I try to pick something to start with. I love going down and just seeing where the vibe takes me, and that kind of free form, like, hey man, let's just see what happens,
right.
Put on our instruments. That's a lot of fun. And sometimes you do get great stuff from that. I think it's a good kind of release too, to go through once in a while, but I find I get more done when I focus myself and limit myself, especially.
Now, you talked before about doing some things with Mike Longo, who apparently has been an influential collaborator for quite some time. Do you still do work with him, and do you do other collaborative work, or do you mostly focus on solo work?
Yeah, well, Mike and I have been best friends since we were in 4th grade, so it's, as soon as we get together, we're already kind of laughing because we know we're going to have a good time. Sure. It's just one of those friendships that I think you can only really have with a lifelong thing.
Right.
So there's always something cool that comes out of it. And I think we both have a high level of respect for each other as far as musicians go. I love collaborating with people, though. I think it's so refreshing to see what other people are thinking, what they're doing, where they're coming from. And it goes, I think we were talking about this earlier, maybe this was before the interview, we were talking about students and learning from them, and how, sometimes if you have no experience, that's a benefit, because right. We're kind of colored by our experiences, and it influences what we choose to do. When I was first learning to play guitar, I was taking lessons, learning theory, and I was showing my friend Thomas down the street how to play guitar so I could play with him.
Right.
And he wasn't learning the theory. He wasn't learning the major scales and stuff. I was showing him power chords, put your hand on this fret, then go to this fret. And I'm going to play a solo over it.
Right.
And then he'd go home, and then he'd come back the next day. He was like, hey, Brian, I made up something kind of cool. And he'd play something, and I'd be like, you're not supposed to do that. That's against everything I just learned.
Right.
But it sounds cool.
Right.
So I think there's something to be said for that. You can learn from anybody. There's something to learn. And I mean, even if it's what not to do, there's something to learn there. But I think fresh perspectives are just, priceless, because we're in our heads all day long. And to get some interaction with somebody else can really just open up a whole new world.
Right. Do you ever do just kind of blind collaborations, I was talking to this guy on a mail list, and all of a sudden he just showed up and we did a track. Do you ever do that kind of thing?
I don't know about that blind. I've done it with sound packs, though, where people will send me some samples. Every once in a while somebody's like, hey man, check this out, and I'll love the samples, but hey, can I do something with it? Or they'll build an instrument. That's actually the last one I did. A man named Corey Morgan, who I don't know at all aside from emails and stuff, sent me some flute samples, and we made a cool little instrument pack out of it.
Oh, that's cool.
In a lot of ways, that's how I got involved with Mark Mosher, too. We'd been kind of following each other's work, and then we just decided to work together, and he sent me some crazy wavetable samples. I know you're familiar with his work. He can create some far out sounds.
Yeah, indeed.
And at first I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, but it challenged me and it made me look at it a little bit differently and came out with something kind of cool. I think that stuff is cool to do because you can kind of do anything with a sound.
Right.
But yeah, I love to jam with people too. I mean, that's really I think one of the ultimate musical experiences is just playing with someone else in a live situation. And that's the way it has been, I guess, throughout human existence, where there was no like sending files over email, but that's like, you just get that kind of like, it's just a communication that is beyond words and ideas.
Right. Do you ever perform live?
Yeah, quite often. I'm playing tomorrow night in my hometown, which will be a lot of fun since people are home from college. And
okay, your hometown is where?
Babylon, New York.
Okay.
Long Island. So a lot of people are home for the holidays from wherever they might be. So a bunch of friends are playing some music. It's going to be a lot of fun. I love playing live. Like I said, that's really the ultimate thrill.
Sure.
To be in front of people and have that energy exchange. It becomes like a feedback loop where they're feeling what you're doing, then you're feeling what they're doing, and it makes you more into it and they get more into it. That to me is just that's untouchable. That's, I don't know, I guess that's like climbing to the top of the mountain or something.
Right. So now you have DJ prominent in your sort of like public name. How much is your live performance DJ like, and how much of it is musician performer like?
I spend a lot of time telling people I'm not a DJ.
Then you might know what I have.
I know. A lot of the alias thing kind of started. I'm a high school teacher, and I wanted to just sort of not use my real name,
right,
and kind of keep that separate. I mean, your students will find you anyway. They're more savvy on the internet than we are. But so that name was just sort of just a silly name that I just used. And the stuff I started doing started catching on a little bit. Then I felt bad about changing it. I just don't even think about it too hard anymore. But I guess there are DJ elements to what I do. I mean, I'm playing all original music.
Mm-hmm.
But, as far as like kind of mixing between tracks and putting the effects on, there's a lot of DJ techniques going on there. But I think of it more as like live musician. It's very heavy on the vocals. I do some synth playing live. I don't actually do any guitar playing right now. Just not sure that is worth it. I was listening to an interview, I think the last interview you had on the podcast, and you guys were talking about, what's worth doing live and what starts taking away from it.
Right. If you're spending your whole time looking at your pedal board, did you somehow mess things up? Right.
Right. And I just don't know that, like, strumming the guitar and playing some chords or solos is really adding as much as it would to not do that.
Well, I also wonder too, I mean, I'm a guitar, my first instrument was guitar as well. And I wonder to what extent playing it would almost be that playing a guitar is a distraction from putting together a good performance, because, and I know there are people that are going to hate me for saying such a thing, but if what you're doing, so I assume you use Ableton Live in performance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're going to be selecting clips, mixing and matching clips, doing crossfades and stuff like that, it's really hard to do with a guitar strapped across your neck.
Yeah. And I'm singing a lot too, and a lot of it, there was a point where I had to decide if I wanted like the headset or the microphone.
Right.
And I like the physical grabbing of the microphone. It's part of it. It's like I picture like Henry Rollins or someone that. These great frontmen that just like Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler can't have a headset.
No, you're right.
He's dancing with his mic stand half the show.
Yeah.
And I really liked that kind of like physicality. And plus, I can kind of sneak out from behind the table every once in a while and kind of interact with the crowd more.
Sure.
A guitar sort of pins you down a little bit. And I'm always afraid, and this is like something I always deal with when I'm playing live, is like, I don't want to look like I'm doing karaoke. I don't want to look like I'm playing guitar to like, a keyboard track, backing track.
Yeah, right.
It's a hard thing for me to kind of, and I know a lot of it's in my head, but it's a hard thing to kind of find the balance for.
Sure, that makes sense.
And I just worry that like, it doesn't add as much as I would like it to. Playing in a band, playing guitar is like a totally different story.
Mm-hmm.
But
doing solo would be pretty rough, yeah. Yeah,
it's like I kind of feel like if I was gonna like do a guitar lead over a track, it's just me kind of saying, "Hey, look at how good I'm in at guitar," check it out, everybody.
Right.
And like, I mean, that might be cool like once in the show, but like every track, like, all right, here I go again.
Right.
Let my computer hold down the beat, and
I'm gonna soar.
When it's just me with a guitar, with the machines,
yeah.
I don't know. Like I've seen a lot of people do it. There are some people that are pretty cool with it. DVS, Moldover, they do some cool stuff like that. I just didn't see it like happening for me as much,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Moldo, right? That's the first person I think of as doing it, and he pulls it off, but to me just barely. And I think it's not because of any issue for him. I think it's just a hard thing to do, because you're right. If you're standing there on stage and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, here comes the guitar solo, it's really hard not to look like a prick, Hate to say it.
I know what you mean. That's what I fear, I guess.
Yeah.
It's cool when you got like you can go up to the bass player and interact with them.
Right.
All that stuff is. I mean, obviously that's a tried and true formula.
Indeed.
But the like kind of solo guy up there, just like playing a lead. I don't know. I've never been a guitar player that was really into like technicality. Like I think of Jimi Hendrix more of a songwriter than a guitar player, and a sound design, like a tone wizard on the guitar. Obviously, he's an amazing guitar player, but like for instance, like someone like Stevie Ray Vaughan, I never really got into, because it was about how good Stevie Ray Vaughan is on his guitar to me, and to me, I don't know. It just, and there are people that like eat that up. I just never was that way.
Right.
So,
that's interesting. That's cool. So before I can't believe that the time is burning through so fast already. I say that at every podcast because it's one of those things.
I was hoping you'd say that for me.
All right. Well, now I have to say it for all the kids. But I want to get into something here that's specific to you, but I think is going to be interesting to a lot of people. You are a certified Ableton trainer, right?
Yeah.
What situations do you find yourself in? Because when I look at kind of the list of people who are doing it, you have some like Laura or Chase Dobson or some of these other people that are really focusing on working with people on putting together tour systems and doing that kind of thing. And then there are other people that are into doing workshops and teaching. What do you find yourself drawn into?
Teaching's definitely big for me. I started teaching for Berklee Music Online with their advanced production with Ableton Live course. Private lessons and the occasional workshop. Maybe I'll go into the city to do something, or that's about that really. And I think it also opened a lot of doors for collaborating with different people, different companies. a lot of that kind of stuff for me. I'm not looking to get on like a big tour or anything. As amazing as that work is, I can't really do that anyway. I would have to leave my job.
Right.
But that's kind of not where it is for me as far as the interest. I do really like interacting with people and showing them the things and learning from them. My Berkeley class, for instance, we do an hour chat every week, and it always goes over. It's just exciting, and it's cool to like just talk to people that are really excited about it. As to compare it to like teaching high school English, you need to take my class to graduate in high school.
Right.
And you are, you have to be there, and you have to do the work. And I spend a lot of time, making people do things they don't want to do. Which can be a little depressing sometimes when you think about it. But when I teach music production, like everyone's like, really excited. They're like asking questions. They're trying to get a better view. They're trying to get to the front. In high school, a lot of people are drooling on themselves at 7 a.m.
Right. Well, but do you find yourself having to, even with teaching Ableton Live, having to compel people to do things they don't want to do? For example, I know you want to do drum tracks, but we're going to work on learning compression or any of that kind of stuff. Do you end up having to pull that kind of stuff anyway?
It does happen occasionally. But at the same time, I do try to like give my students what they're looking for, because, the program's so deep. Music production is so deep.
Right.
I'd rather get them excited about doing stuff, and then we can get into the finer details of compressing a track, or if them making a drum beat is going to get them pumped up and give them enough motivation to keep going, that's great.
Yeah,
but if me teaching them compression is going to turn them off to the process and make them think it's too much, then I'd rather not do that.
Finally, since you do music and stuff, where can people go to hear your work? Where can they go to hear some of your music? Maybe buy some of your music, and where can they go to see you perform in general?
Well, the music right now is on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/AfroDJMac. I don't have a proper recording out yet. I've kind of done things backwards, I think. I've set up all my songs for live performance first. And I think a lot of people write their songs and record them, then build the live performance set around it. Mm-hmm. But my approach has been sort of to like kind of jam on ideas until I start getting structure I like. That was always a little issue for me in writing music, is that I'd come up with a lot of parts and not sure how to put it all together. But using live, I'm able to come up with those parts and then jam on the arrangement. So my next real big project is to get those live tracks into like a recorded format, which I'm, been saying this for a long time, but that's one of the next moves for me. But right now, most of the other stuff, most of the music is on SoundCloud. Okay,
well, cool. I think everyone needs to go and take a listen. There's Thanks. Some fun stuff there. Brian, thank you so much. Again, AfroDJMac.com is where people can go for kind of a launching point. And thank you so much for your time.
Darwin, thank you so much for having me. You're doing great work on this podcast.
Thanks a lot.
And Thanksgiving, I'm very thankful for this.
Well, thank you. All right. Have a great day, man.
You too. Take care.
Okay, just a quick note from the road. I'm still driving around the United States here, trying to get back home. But I just want to thank, again, AfroDJMac. I want to thank him for the great chat. I want to thank you, the listeners. I hope that you had a good holiday if you celebrated. If you didn't, well, we'll hope that you enjoy the next holiday that comes up. Otherwise, thanks a lot for listening, and I'll catch you next week.